funded her medical school dreams for years. Then she publicly erased me from her success story. At 51, I believed I understood the intricate mathematics of human loyalty. My career as a private equity consultant had taught me that every relationship operates on a complex ledger of investments and returns. What I never anticipated was that my stepdaughter would commit the most devastating breach of contract I'd ever witnessed, and that the thunderous applause at her medical school graduation would be the prelude to the most exquisitely orchestrated financial justice I've ever administered. You think you've experienced betrayal? Let me walk you through the 18-year masterclass I received in systematic emotional evisceration. Because what Charlotte orchestrated in front of 800 distinguished guests wasn't just public humiliation, it was a calculated assassination of everything I'd sacrificed to build. But here's what she never comprehended about the man who'd been funding her privileged existence. I don't just manage portfolios, I architect consequences. And the final dividend on her debt of ingratitude was a karmic symphony that still gives me chills. My name is Christopher, and if you've ever poured your soul into loving someone who treats your devotion as nothing more than an inconvenient transaction, you'll understand why what happened next felt like divine intervention wrapped in legal documentation. I met her mother, Victoria, when Charlotte was 9. Victoria was a widow, an ethereal, compassionate woman left behind with catastrophic debt and a precociously manipulative child after her first husband, a charismatic but financially destructive artist named Sebastian, died in a motorcycle accident. I was completely captivated by Victoria, and I embraced Charlotte not as a substitute for her biological father, but as the daughter destiny had finally delivered to me. I didn't merely provide for Charlotte, I invested my entire being in her future. Orthodontic work that cost $8,000, exclusive summer fine arts academies in the Hamptons, a pristine Range Rover for her 16th birthday, complete with an insurance package that nearly wiped out my savings. Private SAT tutoring with Manhattan's most elite educational consultants. I was present at every parent-teacher conference, every tedious school theatrical production, and I was the steady hand that held her hair back during her first catastrophic encounter with champagne at a prep school soiree. I executed all of this with genuine joy because I was profoundly devoted to her mother and determined to earn Charlotte's love through unwavering dedication. But attempting to love Charlotte was like trying to embrace molten glass, beautiful from a distance, and it would obliterate you the moment you made contact. From the beginning, she cultivated a devastatingly romantic mythology about her life. In her carefully constructed narrative, her biological father, Sebastian, wasn't a man who left his family drowning in debt with nothing but pretentious paintings and empty wine bottles. He was a misunderstood visionary, a tortured genius stolen from the world in his prime. She transformed her bedroom into a shrine to his memory, complete with professionally framed photographs and his laughably amateur poetry displayed like sacred texts. My presence, my stability, my relentless financial support, these were merely irritating footnotes in the grand tragic opera she'd composed. I was the tedious, practical sequel to the passionate, artistic original. She eagerly consumed my money, but she never, not once in 18 years, offered me a single moment of genuine respect. My wife, Victoria, found herself trapped in an impossible position. She's naturally conflict averse, and she was so desperately hungry for Charlotte's approval that she enabled the fantasy. "Oh, Christopher, you understand how she operates," Victoria would whisper, wringing her hands after Charlotte delivered a particularly devastating insult. "She's just so emotionally sensitive, so spiritually connected to her father's artistic legacy." It wasn't sensitivity, it was a meticulously choreographed performance, and my bank account was financing the entire production. The true foundation of this saga, the element Charlotte knew about but never comprehended, was the trust. My own father, a brilliant and ruthlessly pragmatic investment banker, adored Victoria but saw through Charlotte's theatrics with laser precision. When he died, his will mandated the creation of the Charlotte Excellence Foundation, an irrevocable trust worth nearly $800,000, designed to support her education and launch her professional life. But my father was nobody's fool. He appointed me, and only me, as the sole trustee, and he embedded a very specific, non-negotiable provision in the trust instrument. Clause 7C, the gratitude and recognition mandate, explicitly stated that the beneficiary, Charlotte, must demonstrate consistent familial appreciation and public acknowledgement of her guardians, meaning both Victoria and me, to access the full discretionary funds post-graduation. It was a stroke of legal genius engineered to prevent the very catastrophe about to unfold. On her 21st birthday, Charlotte was required to sign documents acknowledging the trust's existence and her obligations as beneficiary. I'm certain she barely skimmed the paperwork, her eyes glazing over the legal terminology, seeing only dollar signs. She had no comprehension that what she signed was a binding contract, not an unconditional inheritance. Fast forward to her medical school graduation ceremony. I had financed the entire journey, the astronomical tuition, the textbooks, the luxury apartment near campus with its ridiculous monthly rent. When she was accepted into one of the nation's most prestigious programs, I felt genuinely proud. I viewed it as the culmination of everything we had worked toward together. The day was perfect, crystal blue skies and golden sunshine. Victoria and I sat in the front row, our hearts overflowing. Charlotte was named valedictorian. She looked stunning as she approached the podium, and then she began her speech. She thanked her professors with eloquent grace. She thanked her fellow students with heartfelt emotion. She thanked her mother, Victoria, for unwavering faith and support. Then she paused, a single dramatic tear cascading down her cheek like an audition for an Oscar. And most profoundly, she declared, her voice trembling with theatrical effect, I want to express my eternal gratitude to my father, Sebastian. Even though he cannot be here to witness this moment, I know beyond doubt that he's watching over me from heaven. His artistic soul has been my guiding constellation, my inspiration, my everything. It was for him, and him alone, that I achieved all of this. The audience erupted. Cameras flashed. I saw several people glance at me with unmistakable pity. Victoria's hand tightened around mine like a vice. Charlotte had just publicly thanked a man who hadn't contributed a single dollar or invested a single hour of parenting in her success, a man who was literally nothing but a ghost. Meanwhile, I, the one who had funded every textbook, every meal, every rent payment that carried her to this pinnacle, had been erased. I was invisible, annihilated, soul crushed beyond repair. As the applause thundered like a tsunami, a glacial clarity settled over me. This wasn't an oversight or emotional overwhelm. This was a public declaration of war. It was the performance of her lifetime, and I had been demolished in front of 800 witnesses. I leaned toward Victoria and whispered, deadly calm, let's see who finances her residency after this applause fades. The contract has been breached. She had just publicly and spectacularly violated her legal agreement, and she had no idea what consequences were about to rain down on her privileged existence. The reception that followed was a master class in social torture. People who understood our family dynamics went to extraordinary lengths to avoid my eyes. Charlotte's friends, nourished on the romanticized fairy tale she'd spun, looked at me like an unwelcome intruder at my own stepdaughter's celebration. Charlotte floated in a cloud of narcissistic ecstasy, graciously accepting praise and behaving as if she'd just delivered the Gettysburg Address to a grateful nation. Victoria attempted damage control, fluttering around me with plates of canapes and strained, apologetic smiles. She was just overwhelmed with emotion, Christopher, Victoria whispered desperately. She didn't mean to exclude you. But we both knew that was fiction. She meant every calculated word. The most revealing moment came when a distant relative cornered me near the champagne fountain. That was a beautiful speech, he gushed, oblivious. Her father must have been an extraordinary man. I smiled, a tight, controlled smile that never reached my eyes. He was certainly memorable, I said, which was the most truthful statement I could manage. For the next 6 weeks, I became a phantom in my own home. I remained polite, civil, but distant. I didn't shout or argue, I simply withdrew. The silence was more psychologically unsettling for Victoria and Charlotte than any explosive confrontation could have been. They were used to me as the stable, predictable foundation of their universe. My sudden emotional absence created a vacuum that made them profoundly nervous. Charlotte busied herself orchestrating a grand transition to the city. She had identified a trendy, absurdly expensive artist's loft, the kind with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that commanded $7,000 a month. She discussed it as if it were already hers, assuming trust money would magically materialize. She sent me links to designer furniture and talked endlessly about the sophisticated ambience of her new neighborhood. I would simply nod and say, "That sounds lovely, dear." My lack of enthusiasm, a ticking time bomb they couldn't hear. The call came on a Thursday morning. I was in my office reviewing a client's portfolio when my phone displayed Charlotte. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Hello, Charlotte." Her voice carried its familiar entitlement with an undercurrent of impatience. "Christopher, hi. I'm calling about something bizarre. The property manager for the loft says the deposit check didn't clear, which makes no sense. Is there some kind of processing delay with the trust transfer? I assumed everything would be handled automatically by now. The unspoken accusation was clear. You've made an error. Fix it." She didn't pause. "Anyway, can you just call him and resolve this? The first month's rent is due Monday, and I don't want this to become complicated." The sheer audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't requesting assistance, she was assigning me a task. I leaned back in my leather chair, savoring the moment I'd anticipated for months. A processing delay? "No, everything on my end is proceeding exactly as intended," I said, with the same calm professionalism I use with clients during market volatility. "What exactly did you expect to happen, Charlotte?" Her tone shifted. My composed response didn't fit her script. "What do you mean, what did I expect?" she snapped, an edge creeping in. "I expected the money to be accessible, like we discussed. You're the trustee. You need to resolve this immediately." "Ah," I said, letting the sound hang like a falling blade. "The Charlotte Excellence Foundation." "Yes, I am the trustee, and as trustee, it's my fiduciary obligation to ensure all provisions of the trust are fulfilled. Unfortunately, you have a rather significant compliance issue." Silence stretched across the line. "Compliance issue? What are you talking about? It's my money. My grandfather left it specifically for me." "My father," I corrected gently, "left you that money contingent on very specific conditions you agreed to when you signed the beneficiary acceptance documents on your 21st birthday. Do you recall Clause 7C, the gratitude and recognition mandate?" I could practically hear her trying to access a memory she discarded as irrelevant legalese years ago. I don't remember," she stammered. "It's an important clause," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's scalpel. "It stipulates that access to discretionary post-graduation funds is conditional on your consistent, public acknowledgement of support provided by your guardians, plural, Charlotte. That means both your mother and me. Your valedictorian speech, a complete transcript of which I've already forwarded to the Trust Council, along with professional video of the event, was determined to be a material breach of that obligation. You publicly erased 18 years of my financial, logistical, and emotional investment while glorifying a man who provided nothing. Effective immediately, the fund is frozen, and all discretionary payments are suspended pending legal review." The silence that followed was no longer confused. It was the cold, hard quiet of a guillotine blade severing everything she thought she knew about her future. She didn't scream. She didn't explode. All I heard was a small, choked whisper. What? That single word was the sound of her world imploding. The performative, dramatic Charlotte vanished, replaced by a young woman feeling genuine terror, a chess player realizing her opponent had been waiting 18 years for one catastrophically self-destructive move. "You can't do that," she finally said, her voice barely audible. It wasn't a threat. It was desperation. "No, Charlotte," I said, perfectly level. "That money was a gift, a tool to help you establish your adult life, and it came with clear responsibilities. Responsibility is what you've consistently chosen to ignore. You demanded the benefits of having me as a parent while refusing to acknowledge me as one. You can't have both. The contract you signed was explicit." Shock turned to rage, exactly as I'd predicted. The next call came from Victoria. She was sobbing, alternating between begging me to reconsider and accusing me of cruelty. "Christopher, she's our daughter. How can you inflict this on her?" It was just a speech, just emotions. "It was never just a speech, Victoria, and you know it," I said, my patience thinning. "It was the grand finale of an 18-year performance. For years you asked me to absorb her disrespect, to finance her fantasy, to remain invisible in our own family. You enabled this because you were terrified of confronting her reality. Now she must confront the consequences of her choices. The trust isn't a weapon, it's a mirror, and for the first time she's seeing an accurate reflection of her actions." Predictably, Charlotte threatened legal action. I told her that was an excellent idea. "Please do," I said. "Have your attorney contact the firm. I'll authorize them to provide the full video of your speech, your signed beneficiary agreement, and 18 years of my tax returns listing you as a dependent, plus canceled checks for everything from your orthodontics to your medical school tuition. I'm confident it will be educational." That was the last mention of a lawsuit. The eloquent valedictorian was no match for meticulously documented evidence spanning nearly 2 decades. In the end, she lost the loft, forfeiting the deposit she'd paid with her remaining savings. She moved to a cramped shared apartment in a questionable neighborhood with 4 roommates. She had to secure actual employment, a grueling position as a medical research assistant, to survive. For the first time in her privileged life, she navigated without a safety net, and it was a brutal education in reality. Victoria was heartbroken, and our relationship endured months of strain. But gradually, she began to understand that my actions, though harsh, came from profound love for her, and even for Charlotte. I wasn't simply protecting myself. I was forcing her daughter to mature. What happened to the money? As trustee with the beneficiary in ongoing breach, the trust terms granted me discretion to redirect funds to philanthropic endeavors aligned with my father's values. I didn't claim a penny for personal use. Instead, I worked with the medical school's financial aid office to establish the Gratitude and Grace Scholarship, a full ride awarded annually to a student from a blended family who demonstrates not only academic excellence, but also a profound appreciation for the sacrifices non-biological parents make. The story of its founding, born from an act of spectacular ingratitude, has become something of a campus legend. "Charlotte knows about the scholarship," Victoria told her. "I don't know what the future holds for our relationship. Perhaps one day, after she's lived a life of consequence and earned wisdom through struggle, she'll understand what I was trying to teach her. But I am no longer the silent, invisible benefactor funding her delusions. I am the man who taught her that respect isn't merely a feeling, it's a currency with real value." And she spent every last cent of hers at that podium, in front of 800 witnesses, believing she was delivering a triumph. The applause faded. The consequences echoed for years. Have you ever loved someone who treated your devotion like a transaction? What would you have done in my position? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is allow someone to face the full weight of their choices, even when it breaks your heart to watch them fall.